Hello and welcome. We're going to be taking a look at the full tutorial for No Motherland Without, North Korean Crisis and Cold War from Compass Games. It's a 1 to 2 player card-driven strategy game. I'm going to start by taking a look at our setup. Within the TTS mod here, I have these markers over here for first level infrastructure. These white markers are going to be second level infrastructure, and these red stars are third level infrastructure. The markers that you have included in the game are marked with a little 1, 2, and 3. For visibility purposes, so you can see them on the board clearly, I would recommend stacking them directly on top of one another, just so that way you can kind of guess the 2s from the 1s. And the level 3 markers are a little bit white in appearance, so they'll be easier to see when you're playing with the actual production copy of the game. So to begin, let's look over the elements of our board here. So we have in the center a map of the DPRK that has provinces as well as special cities. And this is the area of the board where we're going to be placing outage markers as well as levels of infrastructure, various infrastructure improvements. Then over in the corner here we have our turn marker. And our turn track is numbered 1 through 7. The game can last as long as 7 turns, or it can end as short as 5 if playing till final score. It can end even sooner if the unthinkable happens, which is prestige falls below critical at the end of a turn in the resolution phase. This is an immediate victory for the West. Or conversely, if the DPRK are ever to get into high prestige and then successfully conduct a missile test, then they win the game immediately. But generally speaking, games will be between 5 and 7 turns. Under each numbered turn on the turn track, you'll see a number within a star. This is our standard of living threshold. And this is a benchmark that the DPRK player needs to meet every turn with total number of infrastructure improvements combined with elites in the active generation. And if they don't meet this benchmark, then they're prestige will drop 1 level. Additionally, we've got reserves, and those are for both the West and the DPRK. You can store up to 3 points of reserves. Reserves are like action points that can be used to conduct activities in later turns. And these can be stored in between turns. They're basically here until you choose to use them, or if some terrible event comes up and takes them away from you, then they can be taken away from you that way. And then next we have our rations track. This is only affected by the play of events. And the rations track is mostly important because, as you'll see here in the lower corner in dark blue, there's a number of AP or activity points that can be contributed as a bonus when doing defect activities, which we'll get into in a little bit later. And then we've got an events and play track here. And this is basically just to mark when events have been played without rifling through the discard and whatnot. So we have 2 events that we're tracking specifically: Korean Air Flight A48 and August Faction Incident being played. And then we've got these effect used markers over here, and they are for marking when the West is passed, if they're able to do so, and that's contingent on status of the global opinion track. And then we also have when one of these 2 legacy events have been used, because they can only be used once per turn. And then this is our enduring events track, holding box for the No Motherland Without You event. Then we have our global opinion. Global opinion can be shifted due to the play of events, or from the West conducting its special activity appeal to global opinion, global community. So you'll see that that has some benefits depending on who's being favored with global opinion. And these benefits are cumulative. So if this marker was all the way to the right or all the way to the left, the player favor would get the benefit of all of these spaces, not just the one that they're currently residing in. We have a defector map. This marks the travel that defectors take, either through mainland China, Thailand to get to the south. Some of them will circumvent Thailand through Cambodia, Laos, and some of them will be traveling across the Gobi Desert to get into Ulaanbaatar to reach the south. And then aside from the defector map, we have a generation map. And the generation map consists of 3 generations of citizens within the DPRK. The first coincides with our Juche era, and it's outlined in blue. And the Juche era covers turns 1 through 3. So we have 2 decks of event cards, and those event cards are black for Juche era and then white for the Songen era. So these event cards will cover your first 3 turns, and then when all these cards are exhausted, then they're essentially set aside, and then we start working with the Songen era deck for turns 4 and beyond. So once that first deck is exhausted, then the active generation will be the Songen era generation, outlined in orange, and then when we are entering our final turn, then this generation here in yellow will be the citizens that are considered active. Anytime you see an event card that refers to the active generation, this is what they're referring to, the one that overlaps with the current era of cards or turn that we happen to be on. All right, so let's get started. So every turn is going to begin with each player being dealt cards until they have a hand of 8. Once cards have been dealt to both players, then we'll proceed to the action phase. The West player will decide whether they want to act first or second. During the action phase, each player will play a card, and they will either use the card for its event, to invest, meaning placing points in the reserves, or conduct activities with the value of the card using AP or action points. After both players have exhausted their full hand of cards, have nothing remaining, then we'll proceed to the resolution phase. During the resolution phase, we'll be checking to see if the DPRK has met their benchmark, the standard of living threshold, with total number of infrastructure improvements combined with elites in the active generation. If they meet their benchmark, then everything stays put. If they fail, then we will see a drop in prestige by 1 level. And then after the resolution phase is ended, we proceed to the cleanup phase. During the cleanup phase, we'll remove any outage markers that are on the DPRK map. We'll go back to the supply, and any event cards that are out on the board that state for the remainder of the turn such and such, those will all be cleared away and placed in the discard pile. Let's talk event cards. So this is going to be the driving force behind much of what we're doing in a game of No Motherland Without. During the action phase, each player is going to be playing event cards to conduct activities, invest in reserves, or even trigger events. If we take a closer look at event cards, there will be a value on the right side. That indicates how many points we have that can be potentially invested in reserves or used to conduct activities. And then on the left side, we have a flag indicating which player the event is associated with. In the case of unassociated events, these ones with the gray-silver band, these events can be played by either the DPRK player or the West, whereas a red event card is an event associated with DPRK, and blue cards are associated with the West. In addition, you'll notice that some cards indicate a shift on the global opinion track. If we look closely at this non-aligned movement event card, it indicates that global opinion would be shifted toward DPRK. Any global opinion shift is always going to be a single space on that track. In the case of Red Cross meetings here, we see the global opinion shift marker is pointing toward the center. That means regardless of which player is currently favored by global opinion, you would shift global opinion 1 space toward the center. Always read carefully, by the way, in the event text when there's a global opinion shift marked on the card. Some global opinion shifts are conditional or will mention that it's done at the end of a turn or when a certain prerequisite has been satisfied. So don't go shifting the global opinion until you've actually read the card. So then, in addition to these event cards, which are played for their effect and then immediately placed in the discard, we have some event effects that work a little bit differently than that. So in the case of this legacy event, West Sea Barrage, legacy event cards are placed in the play area beside the board, and they will continue to impact the game and provide a benefit to that player until game end. And then we have enduring events. And enduring events, when they're played for their event effect, are played to the enduring event track. You place them in this first position on the enduring event track, regardless of how many cards are out here on the enduring events track. So if I were going to play this enduring event, we would shift each card currently on the enduring event track down 1, and then we'd place this card in the first space. If in a future action round, a player were to play another enduring event track, what we would do is shift this enduring event in the 3rd position to the discard pile and move each one down to accommodate it with space. Finally, if you have an event card and only part of it is able to be satisfied, when playing that event, you can play the event to satisfy the part of the event that would actually have an impact. So for example, if the West wanted to play Khrushchev's secret speech here, that card would normally flip the Aid from the Kremlin card to its unavailable side, meaning flipping it face down. However, that card is currently unavailable right now, so that part of the card would not actually take place. However, you'll notice it says shift global opinion toward the West. So if you wanted, the West would be able to still play this event card just to create that shift in global opinion. Something to bear in mind. When you are playing an event card during your action round that belongs to your opponent, meaning if I'm the West, I'm playing a red band card for DPRK, the DPRK event is going to happen before the West conducts any type of investment in reserves or conducts activities. So no matter what, the bad events that belong to your opponents are always going to impact right away, and then you're going to have to mitigate that damage afterward with your activity or choose to live with it. In the case of unassociated events, players are always just choosing whether or not to play that event, so it counts as your own card. So there's no triggering that before doing activities. That card is just an optional event that both players are able to play. So the bulk of the shenanigans we'll be doing during this game will be based off of activities that we're conducting, using points from cards we have. And when we conduct activities in an action round, we can add to the value of a card that we're playing for activities any points that we have currently invested in our reserves. So it's a good way to augment actions to allow yourself to do a couple of things if you want to during your action round, or to do one very super powered action. And as I'm covering activities, please bear in mind, when you are performing an activity, you are not locked into performing just one activity of a type, generally speaking. You are able to, like for example, with a 3-point card, you could spend 1 point of that card doing one activity, 1 point of that card doing another activity, and then take the 3rd point and invest it in your reserves. So you have some options in spreading those points around. So I want to start by kind of covering the different types of activities each player can do, and I'm going to bounce back and forth between the West and DPRK because I think it's important to see kind of the push-pull with some of these activities in terms of like what's going to motivate you to do one thing or the other. So clearly, for DPRK, infrastructure improvements are very important. If we look at our map of the DPRK, each of our provinces has a slightly different color here, but we've got 3 areas that are marked in orange: Pyongyang, Kaesong, and Rason. These are special cities. And why that is important is because for our very first activity we're going to look at, it's placing infrastructure improvements. So for the DPRK, to place an infrastructure improvement, they can place infrastructure improvements in special cities, in places that have an infrastructure improvement already, or places that are adjacent to areas that have infrastructure improvements already. So at the very start on the first turn, when DPRK's action round comes around, the only places they'd be able to place infrastructure improvements right now would be in Rason, Pyongyang, and Kaesong. So any points spent would be placing infrastructure improvements there. Our infrastructure improvements have various levels, and each area can only receive 1 of each level. And you always start with the lowest level improvement first. A first level improvement costs 1 point to place on the map. A second level improvement costs 2 AP to place on the map. And a third level improvement is going to cost 3 AP. Place on the map. So let's say we had Pyongyang now all built up. In a future turn now, if we're spending a card to place improvements, let's say I was playing this 2-point card to place future improvements, now I'd be able to place improvements either in Rason, Kaesong, or I can even place adjacent to Pyongyang. I can't add any more to Pyongyang only because we've already got a 3rd level improvement there. It's all built up. So from there, I would be able on this turn to place in these spaces adjacent. Now with my 2 points, I'm not able to just daisy chain within the same action round. It's based on the adjacency that we have at the start of the action round. So if I want to build into this region here, I would have to do that in a future action round. But right now, I only have these other spaces we talked about before to work with. So that is placing infrastructure improvements. And then now we have outages that can be placed by the West. Each outage marker can be placed for 1 AP out on the board. When an outage marker is placed, that prevents any improvements from being placed by DPRK in this region in a future turn. When an outage marker is placed in a province or city that already has improvements in it, it just prevents further buildup or adding additional levels of infrastructure to those areas. What it doesn't prevent, however, is the DPRK still has adjacency to these regions, and this outage marker does not prevent the DPRK from placing improvements in those regions. It only prevents in the space where the outage marker actually resides. Outage markers can be placed on any of the special cities or provinces, but there is an exception when it comes to Pyongyang. So outage markers, if you're going to place one in Pyongyang as the West, you need to have an outage marker in every other area on the map, which will seldom be worth it. So bear that in mind. Outage markers that are placed on the map, as we said before, are going to be removed from the map during the cleanup phase at the very end of the turn, so they don't carry over from turn to turn. You're just making life difficult for the DPRK just for the turn you're in. For 1 AP apiece, the West may place a defector route on any of these spaces that have an arrow. These routes need to be established in order for the defector en route to be able to move across mainland China, through Mongolia, Thailand, etc., to get to the south. Each defector route costs 1 AP, and the West can place them in any order they want. There's no restrictions on what order these routes are established. The blue routes are going to be able to remain in play. They're not susceptible to removal from events or DPRK activities. Red routes, however, not so much. So the DPRK has the ability to uncover routes as an activity. When the DPRK spends 2 AP, they can uncover the closest defector route to the DPRK. So in this case, that's pretty clear-cut. It would be this one. So for 2 AP, they could remove that marker. While that route's missing, a defector en route would not be able to travel across that section. However, in the case of these 2 defector routes out on the defector map, the DPRK would have their choice if they were to try to pay 2 AP to uncover another route, because they're both equidistant from DPRK. Defect activity. So only one defection can be in progress at any time. You're going to mark a citizen chosen to defect with one of the defector en route markers. I've got pawns standing in for them right now in the TTS mod because they're just a little bit easier to see. But you'll have defector en route counters from your counter sheet. You'll place one of them on the generation map, and one of them will be marking the travel on the defector map. Unmarked female citizens are going to be the first that you choose amongst when you're figuring out or deciding on who's going to defect. Once all of the women within an active generation have been marked, then you can choose amongst the starred citizens for your future defect activities. If everyone in the active generation is marked, then you can choose amongst the citizens that are unmarked in a previous generation. But you can never choose in a future generation. Those citizens are not eligible to do anything because they do not exist yet. So, when we're doing our defect activity, you're spending cards or spending AP from cards and reserves. The base cost to move your defector en route across one of these defector routes is 1 AP per route crossed. So for 2 points, I can cross these 2 routes. Additionally, I would be able to add any AP that I'm receiving from the rations track. Currently there is no modifier, but if the rations track was here, I'd be able to add a bonus 1 AP for the action round to spend on defect activities. I only receive the rations bonus if I've already spent 1 AP either from the card or from reserves to do defect activities this turn. Important to note, your adjacency on this generation map is very important when trying to figure out what the cost is going to be for moving. If your citizen that's defecting is adjacent to an elite, the first route marker they cross when conducting an action or conducting a defect activity is going to cost 1 AP more for each elite that is adjacent to that citizen. After you've crossed that first marker, there's no additional cost for each additional marker or route marker that you would cross. It's just that first one where you have the extra point that you'd have to sink into it. So with this 2 AP card, if I were adjacent to an elite with my defector en route, it would cost me 2 AP to cross this space. If I had any points in my reserves or rations, then I'd be able to move the additional route marker at a cost of 1 AP. Conversely, an active dissident actually provides a bonus AP that can be spent on defection. So in the case of this card being used again for 2 AP, I'd be able to move across 2 routes, and then I'd get the benefit of an additional 1 AP to move a 3rd route because I'm adjacent to this dissident. And if I chose the citizen between the elite marker and the active dissident, these two effectively cancel each other out in terms of their adjacency and the modifiers that they provide. Important note, when you arrive in Mongolia in this red space, you see the 5 pictured there, you'll need to roll a die as the West immediately to see if your defector survives the journey across the Gobi Desert. If you roll under a 5, you'll replace your pawn on the generation map with a deceased marker. And if they survive, then they'll be able to continue on their journey and move on. If you die in the middle of your defect activity, you would simply be able to start with another defector, choose a different citizen, and spend whatever points you have remaining or willing to spend. But that defector's journey is over. When a defector en route reaches the south successfully, either by crossing the long way over to the south or through Mongolia, you immediately replace the pawn on the generation map with a defector marker. Marked defectors are ones that have completed their journey, and these are the ones that are going to actually score for the West at the end of the game. So now that we've talked about the defect activity for the West, I think it's worth noting the imprisoned defector activity that the DPRK is able to do. So that costs 3 AP, and what you would do as a DPRK is you would remove the pawn from the defector map and replace the defector en route on the generation map with an imprisoned marker. DPRK may mark one of their elites deceased for 1 AP as an activity, and then move the elite marker to another eligible citizen within the active generation. So why would you want to do this? Well, when you move your elite marker, it allows you to place it adjacent to unmarked citizens to modify in your favor the cost of defect activities and make it a little bit harder for the West to defect. Additionally, when you are in a new era of the game, you'll be able to move an elite when they're purged onto the active generation where they can continue contributing to your standard of living threshold. When marking a citizen as elite, you must choose an unmarked citizen with a white star if there's one available before choosing any of the citizens without stars. Both the DPRK and the West have a special activity that they're able to conduct. In the case of the West, their special activity is appeal to the global community. It allows them to shift the global opinion track, if successful, one toward them in their favor. When conducting that activity, they will discard one card from their hand, and that card must be blue. It cannot be an unassociated or DPRK event. After discarding that card, they will roll a die, adding the value of the card that was just been discarded to their roll. If the result is 6 or greater, then they will be able to shift global opinion 1 in their favor. So to discuss the final activity, we're going to need to go over missile test events. In the Song and Era deck, which is our white deck covering turns 4 through 7, there are 4 missile test event cards. Each has a global opinion shift toward the west that will only occur if the missile test event is successfully triggered. As well as in red text at the very top of our event text, we have a requirement in ballistic missile research level. So what does that mean? Our ballistic missile research is indicated on the left side of the board. The DPRK is able to advance their ballistic missile research during their action round as a special activity. Special activity basically just means that you're using the whole value of a card that you're contributing, and you don't kick in reserves or mix the activity with any other things. So, for the DPRK, they're able to tuck a card face down on the ballistic missile research track, provided that that card is either unassociated, gray event, or red, DPRK event. I'm not going to tuck them face down for the purpose of this tutorial because I want you to be able to see what I'm tucking in there. But just remember when you're playing a 2-player game that you want to keep everything suspenseful for the West and hopefully scare the crap out of them with your potential to fire missiles. So, when you are advancing ballistic missile research, you're going to be choosing one of those cards, and you will consult the map to determine which position it's going to be tucked in. And it's going to be based off of the current number of third-level infrastructure improvements out on the board. So in this case right now we have 4 of them out on the board. So if we look at the BMR, or ballistic missile research level, we'd be placing a card on the track in the 4 position. This of course would normally be face down, but it is either red or gray. So everything we're doing is completely legal and okay. And then that would be the sum of the activity. So in the future, how do we determine what our current ballistic missile research is? There's 2 things to consider when determining our ballistic missile research level. One is that these numbered positions and these card values are linked in an important way. No cards that are tucked on the board can contribute to the ballistic missile research level beyond whatever the numbered value is of their position. So in this case, I've got a 3 value card tucked in the 2 position. But this card can only contribute a total of 2 points toward ballistic missile research because it is in the 2 position. If I were tucked in this position, I could contribute the full 3 points from this card. Second thing to consider is that when determining ballistic missile research, I've got, in this instance, I've got a 3-point card tucked in the 3 position, a 1-point card tucked in the 1 position. But your ballistic missile research level can never exceed whatever the highest position is that you have cards tucked. So in this case, even though the sum of the value of these cards that are tucked is 4, because my highest position that I've got a card tucked is 3, my current BMR is actually 3. It places a cap on it. And it's important to note, when you are advancing BMR as a special activity, as a DPRK, you can tuck more than 1 card in the same position. It's just bear in mind, you still have that cap. You're not going to be able to exceed the number of points based on the position number. So now, when in a future round, either the DPRK is playing a missile test event for its event effect, or the West is playing this card, at that time, the DPRK would reveal whether they reveal the cards that they've tucked in the ballistic missile research if they've met this number. If they do not have the missile research level needed to launch this event successfully, then they can opt instead to leave their cards face down, tucked on the track. So, when the West plays a missile test event card, we determine whether or not this is going to be triggered first. If the DPRK decides that they don't have the ballistic missile research, then the West would conduct activities with this missile test event card. But in the case of the West playing this card, what would happen after they've completed their activities is this missile test event card would then be placed on the ballistic missile research track face up, just as if it was a tucked card, and it will correspond with whatever the current level is of third level infrastructure improvements. So the game is going to proceed turn after turn until we have seen the second play of the No Motherland Without You event in the Song and Era deck. Once it's triggered for the second time, it signals that the following turn will be the final turn of the game. Oftentimes the seventh turn will be the final turn of the game regardless, but it's important to note that the game can end as soon as turn 5. After the final turn is concluded, then the West and DPRK are going to compare their final scores. So for the DPRK, their score is going to be determined by overall infrastructure. Each improvement on the map is worth 1 victory point. So in this case right now, we've got 4 provinces with 3 improvements, and then we've got 1 with a single improvement and 1 with 2. So as a result there, we've got a total of 15 VP for DPRK. For the West, it'll be identifying victory points based on the number of marked defectors plus the number of marked active dissidents on the generation map. Each marked defector counts as 3 VP for the West, and each active dissident counts as a total of 5 VP. So in this case, we would have a total of 17 VP for the West, and they would win because they have more marked defectors and active dissident points than the DPRK has in infrastructure points. If there is a tie between the two scores, whichever side has the highest reserves would be the winner, and if there's a tie in both reserves and VP, then the DPRK is the winner. Good luck. I hope you enjoy No Motherland Without. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me on BGG, post the forum there on Consum World, or even comment on this video. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoy.